Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. Jim, we're not going to talk about the hiring of the New York Jets' new head coach. I know you're very upset about that. I'm upset that the Bears lost their defensive coordinator. So as we both lick our wounds heading into the offseason here, let's just move on to political news, which I'm sure will not raise our blood pressure at all.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's good we're talking about – it's one of those rare days, Greg, we're talking about politics. We'll be more calming and easygoing and relaxing than talking about football, because I am just ready to, throw chairs like Bobby Knight over the Jets' recent hiring decisions. I hope it turns out well, but I'm not optimistic. This was not a move I wanted to see. I'll put aside my grumbling for now. Maybe at the end of tomorrow's show, I will just do primal screams into my microphone for long stretches. You've been warned, listeners.
Well, I know of several Jets fans on Twitter, and the reaction is unanimous. So it's hard to believe you're all going to be wrong, but you never know. Sometimes bad.
At least we're united.
Yes, that's right. All right, let's move to our good martini. And as we start this martini, you're going to say, what in the world is good about this? But there's a before and an after here. And the good part is the after. Hat tip to Hot Air on a bunch of our stories today as they focus us in the right direction here. They point to a story by the Catholic news agency's Ed Condon, which says Senators Mazie Hirono of Hawaii and Kamala Harris, California, raised concerns about membership in the Knights of Columbus, while the Senate Judiciary Committee reviewed the candidacy of Brian C. Bashar, an Omaha-based lawyer nominated by President Trump to sit on the U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska. Senators also asked whether belonging to the Catholic charitable organization could prevent judges from hearing cases fairly and impartially. In written questions sent to Bashar by committee members December 5th, Senator Hirono stated that the Knights of Columbus has taken a number of extreme positions. For example, it was reportedly one of the top contributors to California's Proposition 8 campaign to ban same-sex marriage. Hirono then asked Bashar if he would quit the group if he was confirmed to avoid any appearance of bias. So the scandal here, apparently, Jim, from the perspective of Democrats, or at least most of them, is that the Knights of Columbus is a Catholic organization, so shockingly, they agree with the church's teachings on abortion and marriage. But there's one Democrat willing to stand up to them, at least publicly. This is courtesy of The Hill. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. While I oppose the nomination of Brian Bashar to the U.S. District Court in Nebraska, I stand strongly against those who are fomenting religious bigotry, citing as disqualifiers Bashar's Catholicism and his affiliation with the Knights of Columbus. If Bashar is unqualified because of his Catholicism and affiliation with the Knights of Columbus, then President John F. Kennedy and the liberal line of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, would have been unqualified for the same reason. Article 6 of the Constitution clearly states there shall be no religious test for any seeking to serve in public office. And then she even goes back in this piece for The Hill to slam Dianne Feinstein for saying, now infamously, the dogma lives loudly within you during the confirmation process for Amy Coney Barrett to the Seventh Circuit. So, Jim, deplorable that the Democrats are doing this. Good for Tulsi Gabbard for once again standing against the tide of her own party here.
Yeah, and if you feel like this podcast can get a little bipolar sometimes, that's what happens when Tulsi Gabbard is the one lawmaker who goes to Damascus and meets with Syria. At least I guess Pelosi did it years ago. After chemical weapons attacks, and then at the same time does something like this. I think it's worth noting that liberal activist Jill Filipovic, not a Democratic lawmaker, but I don't think one who's terribly far from the thinking of a lot of Democratic lawmakers, characterizes the Knights of Columbus as, quote, an extreme right-wing, anti-choice, anti-LGBT, all-male organization. And then once Gabbard said, first of all, dear Democrats, please focus on this message as much as possible the next 2 years. Go right ahead. Go. Don't throw me into that Brer Rabbit. Don't throw me into that briar patch because, you thought you had a tough time with Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Iowa last time, right? What happens come out when you basically are one step away from calling the Knights of Columbus a terrorist organization? Greg, they wear funny hats and dress up strange, too. They've been known to carry around ceremonial swords. That's like one step removed from a box cutter, I tell you. That's where we are. But here's the amazing. Filipovic says Gabbard is not a progressive; she's a fraud. Go down this line. Now, here's the thing. Gabbard, like this, does in my mind. Like, first of all, it's great to see a Democrat standing up and saying, "Look, you don't have to agree with the Knights of Columbus on a particular issue to observe. They're not an extremist group. They're not dangerous. They're not. There are still a lot of Catholics in this country. There are still a lot of pro-life people in this country, and there are still a lot of people who believe in the traditional definition of marriage, that it's between a man and a woman. Whatever you think of the Knights of Columbus, most of what they do is charity work, guys. Let's not care. The fact that they happen to have traditional beliefs, we should not demonize them. They're among the people who are making America a better place, even if you disagree with them on the issues of abortion or gay marriage. Democrats can't do that. The single most important thing, the dogma lives loudly within you, which, by the way, would make a great line in Star Wars Episode 9. I hope they use that at some point. This is a Gabbard. If you'd said to me the same lawmaker who would go and meet with Assad would end up being the one who would really step up and defend the Knights of Columbus, I would not have guessed it to be the same lawmaker. And so I think the lesson from this is that Tulsi Gabbard is probably, out of all the lawmakers on Democratic lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Gabbard is the one who's most likely going to surprise us on a regular basis, for good or for ill. And we can now categorize at least one, if not more than one, in each category.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because we were pretty shocked that she did what she did in Syria, too. So, yeah, she will keep you guessing. And be interesting to see if she runs for president. Sounds like she's very interested in doing it. What going against the tide's going to do for her. She might be out fairly early, given the way the base of the party's acting right now. So,
yeah, everybody says, how are you going to stand out in a crowded field? Tulsi Gabbard will stand out in a crowded field. That much is that much is certain.
Might not help her, but she will definitely.
Not necessarily for the better, but she'll stand out.
Right. Well, she mentioned. Well, she didn't actually mention it, but the previous report from Catholic News did. It's not just Dianne Feinstein. It's Mazie Hirono, and it's Kamala Harris. Let's talk a little bit more about Kamala Harris. CBS News. Senator Kamala Harris of California has decided to run for president in 2020 and will announce her candidacy on or around Martin Luther King Jr. Day, probably at a campaign rally in Oakland. Sources close to the freshman senator tell KCBS Radio. Harris, 54, has been making the rounds of television talk shows and appearing at several events this week as part of a brief tour to promote her new book, hint, hint, The Truths We Hold, An American Journey. At every stop, when asked about running for president, Harris has answered with some variation of, I'm not ready yet to announce her decision, citing family considerations, but several sources knowledgeable about her plans say she is ready and has in fact decided to run with the enthusiastic blessing of her husband and 2 stepchildren. Further on, it says her team wants maximum exposure for her campaign kickoff and has been scouting for a telegenic location that could give her a Springfield moment, akin to Barack Obama's campaign launch in 2007 at the old state capitol in Illinois. San Francisco is viewed as a very nutty place, so they are very interested in doing it in Oakland so they don't draw a bunch of snickers because they did it in San Francisco. So, Jim, the fact that she's looking for an Obama-type moment does not surprise me in the least because her entire run-up to this has been basically copycatting Barack Obama.
Yeah, and I think this is a candidate who Republicans should take seriously. There are a lot of these candidates we've mentioned over the last couple of days, and you're like, Jay Inslee, where's he going? And that kind of stuff. Kamala Harris Kamala. She emphasizes, and the pronunciation of her name is Kama, like the punctuation, and then La at the end, like Shangri-La. So it's Kamala. She's someone who could very well get the nomination. I think what's interesting, and yes, I am in the middle of the works of one of those 15 to 20 to however many I can find things you probably didn't know about Kamala Harris. I guess one of them would count how to pronounce her name. She has her career as a prosecutor, right? Both San Francisco's district attorney, then on to state attorney general, then to the U.S. Senate. And so there's she's been involved in criminal justice reform, and listeners will know that I'm sympathetic to some of those arguments. I think there's areas you can see a bipartisan cooperation on there. But by and large, over her career as a prosecutor, Kamala Harris has been pretty much your ultimate progressive's idea of what a prosecutor is supposed to be, which is to say, going after big corporations and going after the villains in the leftist narrative and kind of taking it easy on the villains in a conservative narrative. environmental protection, all that kind of stuff. Didn't pursue the death penalty for a cop killer, and this got a very public rebuke, not just from cops and the police unions out in San Francisco, but from Dianne Feinstein. This make no mistake. Oh, she's a prosecutor. She can't be that. Can't be that. She's got to be something of a centrist. No. She is very much a progressive down the line. There are some of the Bernie bros and Sanders folks who say, she really is more Hillary-like. She says the right thing, but then she doesn't necessarily follow through. Bunch of issues about the use of things like LAPD officers on her protective detail well outside of Los Angeles at taxpayer expense. Nobody's really understood why that was undergoing that. I'm going to no doubt discuss her early relationship with Willie Brown, the mayor of San Francisco, which is probably a little bit unsavory, perhaps not appropriate for all podcasters' ears. Anyway, the gist there is that there's a lot to unpack there. Take her seriously, conservatives. But again, don't be fooled. She's definitely trying to use the Obama playbook, and this is someone who I think checks all the boxes for progressives, but doesn't always come across that way. And something that, conservatives should be very ready to say, hey, look at her record. This is somebody who would probably make Obama look moderate.
Yeah, the record is extremely liberal, but when she has a more diverse audience, she can sound more moderate. She has not shown that in her committee appearances. I remember her trying to go after Brett Kavanaugh, accusing him of somehow meddling in the Mueller investigation. And then just recently, just before the end of the last Congress, she was really going off the wall with officials from ICE. And so she's clearly trying to figure out how to cover both sides of the party, what's left of the moderate wing and the progressives as well. So it'll be fascinating to watch here. But she's probably one of a handful, I would say, that has a decent shot of actually getting this nomination in the identity politics world. She obviously checks two boxes, being black and a woman, and think that she's probably in better position than just about everyone, with the possible exception of maybe Elizabeth Warren and maybe Joe Biden. And if Beto ever finishes his dental cleaning today, he might be in that mix as well.
Boy, he's going to have that white smile on the campaign trail.
That's a whole podcast in and of itself. The fact that we got possible presidential candidates live Instagramming their dental visits. It's we're getting to a really dangerous part in our culture when we're doing that.
Beto O'Rourke 2020, because reality bites.
That's right. All right, let's move to our final martini here, our crazy martini, and it starts with the shutdown, but it certainly doesn't end there. CNBC. The shutdown has left approximately 800,000 federal workers in financial limbo. Around 420,000 essential employees are working without pay, while another 380,000 have been ordered to stay home, according to calculations to CNBC by a professor at New York University. But government workers are far from alone in feeling stressed about not getting paid. Nearly 80% of Americans, 78% officially, say they're living paycheck to paycheck, according to a 2017 report by employment website CareerBuilder. Women are particularly vulnerable. 81% of them report living paycheck to paycheck, compared with 75% of men. And it's not merely those earning lower wages who are struggling. CareerBuilder reports that nearly 10% of Americans with salaries of $100,000 or more live paycheck to paycheck as well. That means many workers are not able to put anything significant into savings. More than 50% of respondents say they save less than $100 a month. And a comparable 2017 survey from Go Banking Rates found that 61% of Americans don't have enough money in an emergency fund to cover 6 months' worth of expenses. So, Jim, obviously we have the immediate story of the shutdown, but the bigger story is we've got over half the country in dire financial straits, even though they're gainfully employed. And if we hit a major economic speed bump again, we're going to have a lot of people hurting big time.
Yeah, these numbers are really surprising, and I can't help but wonder if you actually could go into the financial data, how accurate is it? Obviously, this is self-reported. This is self-assessed. Maybe they have a bit more in their savings than they want to acknowledge. And I almost wonder, Greg, if there's a certain sense of like admitting that you're a saver is almost embarrassing. You come across as a goody two-shoes, that if everybody else feels like, oh, my God, I'm barely getting by. Oh, my God, I am paycheck to paycheck, man. I am squeezed, same way that everybody likes to say that they're stressed and they're actually not as stressed as they acknowledge. That nobody wants to say, no, I'm saving and I'm doing fine. You come across as kind of a smug goody two-shoes that everyone else kind of resents for being the ant and not the grasshopper.
Yes.
The ant saves and the grasshopper's out partying and stuff like that. I believe they are.
Yeah, that's right, I think.
I hope I'm remembering. If I'm wrong,
yeah.
People are going to email in and let me know. Like, I got the insects mixed up. But then the question on that is, okay, if it really is up to that 80%, 80% of Americans are not poor, right? 80% of Americans are not making minimum wage or making low wages, right? So clearly this means a significant chunk of the people you'd consider to be middle class, maybe even upper middle class, describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. This should be really worrying because traditionally your financial advisor will say, your problem is you're spending too much money and you need to save money. I assume people know this. I assume people know that it's ominous to look in your bank account and see small numbers and to know that if, God forbid, the car breaks down, the fridge breaks, your hot water heater breaks, all these different things that can go wrong in life. Suddenly you have a major medical problem where you don't have money and savings to cover that. You know your life is going to suddenly be, hit a giant bump in the road and be very difficult to recover from that. The question then is, so are people, if people are genuinely assessing this and they really are saving less than $100 a month, even though they're making what we would consider to be middle-class wages, if you recommend it to people, say, well, that means it reduces consumer spending. If that reduces consumer spending, at some point you end up having economic after effects of that. Because we want a growing economy, we want people spending money. We want people out there buying stuff because that means more sales. That means companies grow. That means they hire more workers, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I remember reading a fascinating report about the early months of the Great Recession. Lehman Brothers hit. It's right before the 2008 election, and America's getting the most dire economic news they've ever seen. They're frightened. And people looked at the amount of money that was spent on food. Now you figure that would be fairly normal from week to week. You figure, okay, the economy takes a rough turn. Restaurant spending might be down. People might not be splurging. You get chicken nuggets instead of the steak or something like that. But they ran the numbers. They looked at food consumption during that time period, and they realized Americans starting eating the stuff in the back of their pantries. That can of tomatoes has been sitting there for really too long. Canned kidney beans and all that food that's kind of been left over for a long while. They did so. That's how freaked out Americans were, that they didn't want to spend money on groceries, right? Now, my suspicion is if everybody stops spending money, that exacerbates the economic hardship because all of a sudden people aren't going out and buying groceries the way they usually are. So this is a really ominous economic indicator. My hope is that it is erroneously self-reported, that people are actually in better shape than they want to acknowledge. They just feel constantly squeezed because they can't save as much as they are. If these numbers are accurate, then even though it seems like, and we've talked about it several times in this podcast, the state of the economy is pretty darn good. Unemployment below 4%, wage growth finally going in the right direction, workforce participation up, et cetera, et cetera. This may be actually a surface deep, a skin deep economic boom because we're not actually building any type of financial cushion for hard times in the future.
No, very well said. And of course, if Americans are looking to their government to set an example for them on fiscal responsibility, well, they better look somewhere else. Jim, we'll reconvene tomorrow.
Look forward to it, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to tune in again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.